December 26, 1944. Bastogne, Belgium. Late afternoon. General Dwight David Eisenhower stood motionless as the message was read aloud again, slowly, carefully, so there could be no mistake. American tanks had entered Bastogne. For several seconds, no one spoke. Eisenhower did not smile. He did not celebrate. Instead, he closed his eyes briefly, as if absorbing the full weight of what had just occurred. Because this was not just the relief of a town. It was the resolution of a gamble that should never have worked. And the man who made it work was GeorgeSPatton. 10 days earlier, the war in Europe had taken a sudden, terrifying turn. December 16, 1944. Before dawn. Ardennes forest. German artillery erupted across a quiet front the Allies believed was secure. Within hours, armored columns punched through American lines, crushing lightly held positions and driving deep into the Ardennes. The attack was massive. Coordinated. Relentless. Entire American units were cut off. Roads jammed with retreating soldiers. Communications failed. Confusion spread faster than orders could travel. By the end of the first day, it was clear this was no limited counterattack. It was Hitler's last, desperate attempt to change the course of the war. At the center of the German plan stood a small Belgian town few had heard of before that winter. Bastogne. 7 major roads passed through it. Lose Bastogne, and the Germans could surge westward unhindered. Hold it, and their entire offensive slowed to a crawl. The 101st Airborne Division arrived just in time. They came without winter coats. Without enough ammunition. Without certainty of relief. Within hours, Bastogne was surrounded. December 18th. Luxembourg City. Lieutenant General Omar Bradley studied reports that no commander ever wants to read. The Ardennes sector, his responsibility, was collapsing. Intelligence assessments had been wrong. The terrain had not stopped the Germans. Inexperienced American divisions had been placed in harm's way. And now Bastogne was isolated. Bradley reached for the phone. GeorgeSPatton answered with his usual energy. "Brad, I've got a bridgehead across the Saar," he said. Third Army was finally breaking into Germany. Momentum was on his side. Bradley cut him off. "There's serious trouble up north." He explained the scale of the German offensive. The shattered lines. The Airborne Division surrounded at Bastogne. Bradley needed help immediately. Patton objected. Losing the 10th Armored Division would cripple his own advance. But the situation was critical. When the call ended, Patton stood staring at his maps. Unlike many commanders, Patton did not dismiss bad news. He prepared for it. That night, he summoned his staff. "The Germans have launched a major offensive through the Ardennes," Patton said. "I believe Eisenhower will order us to turn north." The room went quiet. Turning north meant pivoting an entire army, 250,000 men, thousands of vehicles, 90 degrees in winter, while still fighting. It was unprecedented. "Start planning," Patton ordered. 3 plans. 3 divisions. 4 divisions. 6 divisions. His officers obeyed, even though few believed the order would ever come. December 19th. Verdun, France. 16 Allied commanders gathered in a freezing stone room. Eisenhower opened bluntly. "This situation is to be regarded as one of opportunity." Some could hardly believe what they were hearing. Bastogne was surrounded. American casualties were rising by the hour. Then Eisenhower turned to Patton. "How soon can you attack north?" Patton stood. "I can attack with 3 divisions in 48 hours." The room fell silent. Some laughed. Others shook their heads. Bradley stared at him, wondering if his old friend had finally crossed the line between confidence and fantasy. "When can you start?" Eisenhower asked again. "The morning of December 22nd. Bradley's chief of staff whispered, "His bluffing." But Bradley knew better. Patton never made promises lightly. As the meeting ended, Bradley pulled him aside. "You've just promised the impossible," he said. Patton didn't hesitate. "I'll be in Bastogne by Christmas." Outside, snow fell steadily across France. And far to the north, the men of the 101st Airborne waited, unaware that an entire army had just been turned because one man refused to accept delay. December 19th to 21st, 1944. Northern France and Luxembourg. The order to turn north went out before dawn. Across hundreds of miles of front, staff officers woke division commanders with instructions that defied instinct and training. Units that had been fighting east toward Germany were now to disengage, reverse direction, and move into one of the most difficult terrains in Western Europe, under winter conditions few had ever experienced. This was not a withdrawal. It was a full-scale pivot in contact with the enemy. For Third Army, the clock had already started. Patton understood something essential. If the movement slowed, the gamble would fail. There would be no pause to reorganize. No time for perfect alignment. Speed mattered more than symmetry. Columns of vehicles began to roll north almost immediately. Tanks, trucks, artillery, ambulances, fuel carriers, stretching for miles along narrow, icy roads. Military police were rushed to intersections to prevent gridlock. Engineers moved ahead, clearing routes, marking turns, repairing bridges under fire. The Ardennes winter offered no mercy. Temperatures plunged below freezing. Snow mixed with sleet. Engines refused to start. Vehicles skidded off roads. Frostbite became as dangerous as enemy fire. Yet the movement did not stop. At the heart of the maneuver was the 4th Armored Division. Patton chose them deliberately. They were experienced, aggressive, and accustomed to rapid movement. They would spearhead the attack toward Bastogne. Behind them followed the 26th and 80th Infantry Divisions, tough, battle-hardened units that would protect the flanks and keep the corridor open. Every mile north increased the risk. Supply lines stretched thin. German counterattacks were possible at any moment. If the relief failed, Third Army could be caught exposed and blamed for catastrophic overreach. Patton accepted the risk without hesitation. Tempo was everything. By December 21st, the leading elements of Third Army were in position south of Bastogne. They had moved between 75 and 150 miles in less than 3 days, an achievement many believed impossible even without combat. But movement was only the beginning. Now they had to fight. The German command had not been idle. Once they realized an American counterattack was forming from the south, they reinforced defensive positions aggressively. Infantry dug into forests and villages. Anti-tank guns were concealed along frozen roads. Armor waited in reserve, positioned to strike advancing columns. The objective was clear: delay Patton long enough for Bastogne to fall. On December 22nd, the attack began. The 4th Armored Division advanced into immediate resistance. German artillery hammered the roads. Snow-covered fields hid minefields and ambush positions. Tanks struggled for traction. Infantry moved cautiously through frozen woods where visibility dropped to a few yards. Villages became death traps. Every house had to be cleared. Every intersection contested. Progress was measured in yards, not miles. German counterattacks struck repeatedly, often at night, when confusion was highest and coordination weakest. Still, Patton's forces kept moving. They did not stop to consolidate. They attacked, pushed forward, and attacked again. Inside Bastogne, the situation grew increasingly desperate. Ammunition was critically low. Medical supplies were nearly exhausted. Wounded soldiers lay in makeshift aid stations, suffering from exposure as much as from their injuries. When German officers delivered a surrender ultimatum on December 22nd, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe's reply was blunt and unforgettable. Nuts. The word spread quickly through the perimeter. Morale held, but time was running out. On December 23rd, the weather finally broke. Clouds lifted. Fog cleared. For the first time in days, Allied aircraft filled the sky. C-47 transport planes roared overhead, dropping desperately needed supplies into Bastogne. Fighters and bombers struck German positions surrounding the town, ripping open defenses that had held firm under ground assault. Inside Bastogne, soldiers cheered as parachutes blossomed against the winter sky. Relief was closer now, but still not there. South of the town, the 4th Armored Division continued to grind forward. German resistance stiffened as American units approached the final approaches to Bastogne. The enemy knew this was the decisive moment. Task forces were formed, combined groups of tanks, infantry, engineers, and artillery, designed for speed and flexibility. One of those formations was placed under a commander whose name would soon become inseparable from Bastogne. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams. Aggressive. Calm under fire. Respected by his men. On December 26th, Abrams received his order. Break through. No matter the cost. As his tanks rolled forward through snow and smoke, the road ahead narrowed. Beyond it lay Bastogne. And beyond Bastogne lay the answer to whether Patton's gamble would stand, or collapse under the weight of reality. December 26, 1944. Bastogne, Belgium. 4:50 p.m. A single American tank emerged from the snow-covered road south of Bastogne. Its hull was scarred. Its tracks were caked with ice and mud. The crew had been fighting without rest for days. Standing in the open hatch, the tank commander waved an orange recognition panel into the cold air. From the tree line ahead, figures appeared, helmeted, bundled in whitewashed gear, weapons raised. For one brief, dangerous moment, no one moved. Then the paratroopers recognized the tank. They ran toward it, shouting, pounding the steel hull with frozen gloves. Task Force Abrams had broken through. The siege of Bastogne was over. Inside the town, the news spread with astonishing speed. Men who had not slept properly in a week embraced each other. Wounded soldiers smiled through pain. Medics wept openly. Supply trucks followed the tanks within hours. Ammunition arrived. Food arrived. Medical evacuations began immediately. Bastogne had held, but now it could breathe. The message reached Supreme Headquarters shortly afterward. Eisenhower listened in silence as the report was read. Patton had done exactly what he promised. Not quickly. Not eventually. Exactly. Eisenhower turned to the officers around him and spoke quietly. "Tell George he's done a magnificent thing." For Eisenhower, praise was never casual. Every word carried weight. He understood what this meant, not only tactically, but strategically. The German offensive had been blunted at its most critical point. Without Bastogne, their timetable collapsed. Supply lines faltered. Momentum bled away. The war in the West had just changed direction. Omar Bradley's reaction was more complex. Relief, admiration, and disbelief blended into something approaching awe. Bradley had doubted the timeline. He had feared the risks. He had worried that Patton had overpromised in front of the entire Allied command. Now he had to face the truth. Patton had delivered. In his later writings, Bradley would call the maneuver the most brilliant operation of the war. For a man known for understatement, it was extraordinary praise. Patton, for his part, refused the word rescue. When congratulated, he brushed it aside. The 101st didn't need saving, he said. They were doing fine. We just opened the door. It was classic Patton, pride tempered by respect for the soldiers who had endured the siege. And yet, the reality was undeniable. Without Third Army's intervention, Bastogne could not have held indefinitely. Ammunition was nearly gone. Medical supplies were exhausted. German forces were tightening the ring. The margin had been razor thin. The fighting around Bastogne did not end that day. For weeks, German forces attempted to retake the town. Snow continued to fall. Casualties mounted on both sides. But the psychological shift was irreversible. The German offensive had lost its momentum. The Allies had seized the initiative. And at the center of it all stood a decision made in a freezing room at Verdun. In January 1945, Eisenhower visited Bastogne. The town was shattered. Buildings were hollowed by shell fire. Roads were cratered and scarred. He awarded medals to the men who had held the line. Among them stood Patton and Bradley, old friends, rivals, commanders bound by the weight of responsibility. Later, in private, Eisenhower reflected on what had occurred. Patton's pivot had not merely relieved a town. It had demonstrated something essential about leadership in war. That preparation makes speed possible. That audacity, when disciplined, can overcome impossibility. And that history often turns not on numbers, but on decisions made under unbearable pressure. Years later, historians would debate Patton endlessly. They would argue over his temperament, his ego, his controversies. But when the moment came, when the front collapsed, when Bastogne was surrounded, when time was running out, Patton did not hesitate. He acted. And when he reached Bastogne first, Eisenhower knew exactly what it meant. The gamble had paid off. The war would go on, but the outcome was no longer in doubt.